Famicom at their Kyoto headquarters. Representatives from more than 200 companies, including TV press, magazines, and newspaper reporters, were on hand to see the unveiling. Nintendo announced they would ship the Super Famicom by July of 1989, an extremely ambitious deadline. Nintendo also showed some early game demos, but notably absent was Super Mario Bros. 4. The development team was still trying to solidify the game. Along the way, they made constant changes. Early on, the Super Mario Bros. 3 influence was apparent. The graphical style, including Mario's sprite, was very similar. Many enemies looked identical to their Super Mario Bros. 3 counterparts, and the Koopaling bosses still occupied the castles. They also brought back familiar power-ups, like the raccoon suit for flying. And the world maps looked strikingly similar, albeit much larger. It may have looked too similar. Co-workers frequently commented, "It doesn't look all that different from the Famicom games." Tezuka took the criticism to heart and made some changes. Shigefumi Hino gave the sprites more detail. At one point, the team even experimented with a three-dimensional look, but they didn't stop there. Map director Hideki Kono also changed the world map considerably, clearly departing from the Mario 3 style. In addition to graphical upgrades, the Super Mario Bros. 4 team had to figure out how to show off the new features of the Super Famicom. The 16-bit console could do all sorts of neat tricks, like background scaling and rotation, and transparency effects. And as a launch title, Nintendo wanted Super Mario Bros. 4 to show off the new hardware. But Miyamoto was hesitant to throw in new things just for the sake of it. He said, "Just because we found something cool the hardware could do, something that made us go, whoa. If it ruined the balance or flow of the game, we didn't want to include it." The development team thoughtfully added new elements. Large sprites emphasized the Super in Super Famicom. Transparency effects in the water and on enemies immersed the player into the game. Scrolling backgrounds gave levels a sense of depth. Rotating platforms gave Mario new, challenging boss fights. In addition to the technological upgrades, the Super Mario Bros. 4 team also honed in on the core game design. Luckily, they had a wealth of player feedback at their disposal. On October 23, 1988, after 2.5 years in development, Super Mario Bros. 3 finally hit Japanese store shelves. The game received rave reviews and was the best-selling Famicom game for months. But Super Mario Bros. 3 wasn't the most friendly to new players. Miyamoto wanted to find a better balance with Super Mario Bros. 4. As a launch title, the game needed to appeal to players of all skill levels. So the team implemented a few features to make the game a bit easier. They added checkpoints to levels that made Mario big if he was small. In addition, the team added an item reserve box. In the previous game, Mario could stockpile power-ups and use them before entering levels. Now, Mario could bring extra power-ups into the level. If he got hit, or if players pressed select, the item would drop down automatically. By the summer of 1989, Super Mario Bros. 4 was starting to separate itself from the previous games, and the development team took it a step further by giving the game a new title. With a whole new world for Mario to explore, there could be no better name: Super Mario World. But everything changed when, not surprisingly, Nintendo decided to delay the release of the Super Famicom. There were a multitude of reasons. The Super Famicom hardware was, for the most part, ready to go. But there was a distinct lack of software. Nintendo was still working on launch titles. And although 21 companies had signed on to become third-party developers for the system, none of them had development kits yet. There was also a global chip shortage. A new generation of semiconductor and chip technology caused manufacturers to split their production capacity. That drove prices up considerably. Yamauchi hoped to keep the Super Famicom at a price point of around 20,000 yen, or around $150. However, with the chip shortage, the cost of the Super Famicom could shoot up beyond 30,000 yen, or around $225. And with the chip shortage, Nintendo maxed out its manufacturing capacity. At that time, Nintendo produced 3 million Famicoms and Nintendo Entertainment Systems per month. They were also dealing with stock shortages of their new handheld system, the Game Boy. Nintendo planned to launch the Game Boy in North America later that year. The stock shortages led one columnist to comment, "Why launch a competing product when you cannot cope with what you already have?" There was also still life left in the 8-bit Famicom. Super Mario Bros. 3 was a huge success, and NX's upcoming Dragon Quest IV was guaranteed to fly off store shelves. It was so popular that NX planned to release the game on the weekend, to prevent kids from skipping school to buy it. Yamauchi's early teasing of the Super Famicom seemed to have worked. In a Famitsu magazine survey, many readers claimed they would rather wait for the Super Famicom than buy a PC Engine. Although NEC's PC Engine was selling well, it was still nowhere near the reach of the Famicom, which was now in 1/3 of Japanese households. And Sega's 16-bit Mega Drive failed to make much of an impact. They had only sold 400,000 units up to that point. With the threat of competition dying down, there was simply no need to rush the Super Famicom's launch. So on July 28, 1989, Nintendo held a press conference at their Kyoto headquarters and announced they were delaying the Super Famicom for an entire year. But while the delay made headlines, there was more to share. Nintendo unveiled a new design of the Super Famicom, and for the first time, they previewed their most anticipated game, Super Mario World. But surprisingly, the reaction was mixed. While many publications were impressed by the technological advancements, they felt somewhat disappointed in the gameplay and graphics. Famitsu magazine commented that it looks to be the same as the previous Mario games. And Electronic Gaming Monthly, a US publication getting early scoops on games from Japan, stated Super Mario World was not as graphically impressive as Nintendo's other upcoming games. But this would not deter Takashi Tezuka, Shigeru Miyamoto, and the rest of the Super Mario World team. The delay of the Super Famicom turned out to be a blessing in disguise. With another year of development at their disposal, there was plenty more to add that would turn Super Mario World into one of the greatest platformers of all time. With the Super Famicom delayed until the fall of 1990, the Super Mario World team had an extra year to work on the game. For Shigeru Miyamoto and Takashi Tezuka, it was a chance to refine the game's balance. How could the development team ensure both newcomers and veterans got the most out of Super Mario? And how could they give these players more freedom to play the game in their own way? The team often met late into the night, discussing potential ideas. But one idea unearthed a wealth of possibilities.
I think great video games are like favorite playgrounds, places you become attached to and go back to again and again. Wouldn't it be great to have a whole drawer full of playgrounds right at your fingertips? Shigeru Miyamoto.
Miyamoto and Tezuka found their playground with the world map. Nintendo first introduced a world map to the Super Mario series with Super Mario Bros. 3. It allowed players to choose what levels they wanted to play to reach the end. However, it was still a fairly linear experience to get to Bowser and save the princess. The development team initially carried this concept over to Super Mario World, but besides some updated visuals, it was functionally the same. But what if the world map was more than just a map? Miyamoto said, "We were thinking that players should be able to play with the map itself." So the map got a complete overhaul. Mario had a whole new world to explore, Dinosaur Land, and players were free to explore Dinosaur Land how they wished. Rather than having 8 separate worlds, Dinosaur Land was one massive area with interconnecting regions. Players could backtrack and replay levels, or explore new areas of the map. The development team filled the map with secret levels and hidden paths. This gave players new ways to experience the game. For example, players could find a secret passage to Bowser's castle quickly, or take their time and play through all the levels in order. And beating Bowser was no longer the end of the game. There were 96 exits players could find throughout Dinosaur Land's 74 levels. Sometimes Mario found a secret pipe that led to a new exit. Other times, a key opened up a new pathway on the map. Players might find an area that they previously thought was unreachable. The development team provided clues to help the player find these secret exits. For example, levels that flashed red had multiple exits. Visual clues like a notch on the cliffside or a pipe off the beaten path might mean a nearby secret. And thanks to a save battery on the cartridge, players could take their time to find all the exits. A number on the main menu let players know their progress. But the changes to the world map were not just about levels and secrets, they also brought balance to the game. For many games, developers would add an easy mode or hard mode to the main menu to change the difficulty. But Miyamoto was not a fan of this design choice. Instead, he wanted players to adjust the difficulty as they played. So the director of programming, Toshihiko Nakago, came up with an idea: dotted line blocks. The idea started from a simple addition. The team wanted to try new block types and levels. From there, it evolved into much more. Throughout levels, players came across various colored dotted lines. When the player found the corresponding switch palace on the map, the blocks activated. It made levels easier by providing a new platform for Mario to jump on, or providing power-ups. If players wanted to make the game harder, they could ignore the switch palaces. Dinosaur Land now resembled a board game. There were 9 unique areas to explore, like Forest of Illusion, Twin Bridges, and Star World. And many regions were named after food, like Donut Plains, Vanilla Dome, and Chocolate Island. With a new map and unique regions for Mario to explore, character designer Shigefumi Hino saw an opportunity to update many of the game's visuals. Mario got a makeover with back pockets on his overalls, an emblem on his hat, and improved shadows. Miyamoto specifically requested Mario have white in his eyes. Hino complied with the request, but left Mario with tiny black eyes when he was small. He thought it gave Mario more character. Hino also added small details. Mario flashed a peace sign when he finished a level. When Mario lost a life, a look of horror swept over his face. But Hino didn't stop with Mario. Many classic enemies, including Goombas, Lakitus, and Drybones, got a new look. Koopa Troopas changed significantly. Previously, Koopa Troopas acted like turtles, slowly moving around levels. Now, Koopa Troopas walked upright. Mario could bounce them out of their shell, revealing a vulnerable little reptile in its underwear. Some would even try to recover their shells or kick them at Mario. Along with classic enemies, Hino and Tezuka came up with new ones. Among them was Wiggler, a volatile caterpillar, Chargin' Chuck, a football-playing Koopa that took 3 hits to take down, and Rip Van Fish, a sleepy fish who excitedly chased Mario when he woke up. And what was Dinosaur Land without a few dinosaurs? There was Rex, who required 2 stomps to take down. Dino Rhino, a large nearsighted enemy who turned into a dino torch if you stomped on him. Reznor, a fire-breathing triceratops that guarded several fortresses. And Blarg, a massive dinosaur who lurked beneath the lava, waiting for Mario to pass by. But not every dinosaur was an enemy. In fact, one new friend would forever change the Super Mario series. For the past 5 years, Shigeru Miyamoto had a sketch of Mario riding a dinosaur taped up at his desk. He had wanted to implement the idea since the first Super Mario Bros. Game. The team tried to add it to Super Mario Bros. 3, but technical limitations prevented them. But with the more powerful 16-bit Super Famicom, there was hope. Tezuka noticed the sketch again and decided to give it a shot. He took the idea to character designer Shigefumi Hino and asked him to draw a dinosaur that Mario could ride like a horse. Hino's first idea came out looking like a crocodile. Tezuka made some suggestions. The dinosaur should be smaller, cuter, and related to the Koopa Troopas. Hino made modifications, and, over time, the character's final form took shape. A green dinosaur with a shell on its back that doubled as a saddle. Tezuka recalled that, quote, "He turned into quite the cute character." As a placeholder, they named the character Yoshi, a nickname of Mie Yoshimura, an artist on staff. But the name stuck. Writing Yoshi was a fun new way to explore levels because he offered more than just transportation. Yoshi could eat enemies or grab hard-to-reach items, help Mario jump extra high, and traverse rough terrain. Yoshi could also gain new powers. For example, with the different colored Koopa shells, Yoshi could breathe fire, temporarily fly, or stomp the ground. In addition, he could eat berries scattered around levels to earn more time, power-ups, and coins. Yoshi also provided Mario with a free hit. When an enemy hit Mario, Yoshi would run away, but the player had an opportunity to get Yoshi back. The team also added adorable baby Yoshis in various colors. Mario could feed the Yoshi's enemies to make them grow up, and each colored Yoshi had specific traits when they gobbled up Koopa shells. Essentially, Yoshi was a new, robust power-up for Mario to use on his journey. The development team brought back old power-ups as well. There were the usuals, the Super Mushroom to make Mario big, a Fire Flower that let Mario shoot fireballs, and a Superstar that granted temporary invincibility. The development team initially brought back the Super Leaf, which turned Mario into a raccoon and allowed him to fly temporarily. But with all the other changes happening, they thought they could do better. So they experimented with a few ideas, such as wings, before finally settling on a cape. The cape, acquired by picking up a feather, worked similarly to the raccoon suit. Players could hit enemies with it and, after a brief runoff, could temporarily fly. But it offered so much more. Players had more control mid-flight, and by rocking back and forth, they could stay in the air much longer. Mario could also attack enemies from above. It was the most intricate power-up in the series thus far. The development team constantly tinkered with the cape controls. Many test players found it too difficult at first. And thanks to the extra buttons available on the Super Famicom controller, Mario also had a new move, the spin jump. By pressing the A button, Mario could destroy blocks from above, bounce off obstacles, and stomp enemies. The development team even utilized the shoulder L and R buttons on the new controller. It allowed the player to scroll the screen forward or backward slightly. In previous Super Mario games, certain levels required players to take a blind leap of faith. Now, players could scout out what was ahead before making a decision. Super Mario World was finally coming into its own. The development team overhauled almost everything. A new world, new enemies, new friends, new minigames, and new power-ups. And to complement everything were the brilliant compositions and sound effects from composer Koji Kondo. Since the beginning, Kondo had worked on the Super Mario Bros. Series, composing the memorable original theme. While working on Super Mario Bros. 3, he composed a plethora of new music with a distinct reggae vibe and a ton of percussion. But after completing the project, Kondo thought he may have composed too much music. As a result, he felt like each song made less of an impact. Kondo's favorite songs were ones with beautiful melodies. He felt they left a more profound impression on people. So, with Super Mario World, he wanted to focus on one melody and incorporate it into multiple songs. But due to the new hardware, he found the work, quote, 100 times more difficult. Kondo had to make all the sound samples himself and learn new software tools. But he quickly realized the Super Famicom allowed him to do so much more with the music. The 8-bit Famicom only had 5 audio channels and was limited to electronic sounds. But the Super Famicom had 8 dedicated sound channels and supported samples and sound effects from all kinds of instruments. As a result, Kondo got to completely rethink what game music could be. Kondo used a variety of instruments for both the music and sound effects. It resulted in a rich, warm sound unlike anything players had ever heard before in a Super Mario game. Players heard Kondo's catchy melody throughout the game. The above-ground music made the melody sound bright and fun. In contrast, the Fortress music gave the melody a sinister, mysterious vibe. Kondo added a few subtle musical cues too. When Mario found Yoshi, a new percussion track kicked in over top the music. Kondo even added a reverb effect to the sounds while Mario was underground, adding to the level's atmosphere. And with the additional memory in the Super Famicom, Kondo was able to compose a title song for the game, a first for the Super Mario series. By the summer of 1990, 2 years after development started, Super Mario World was mostly complete. Tezuka and his team felt they had taken the concepts that made the series so special: freedom, athleticism, friendliness, and perfected them. It was a massive, side-scrolling 2D platformer. Nintendo packed everything athleticism. They had taken the concepts that made the series so special: freedom, athleticism, friendliness, and perfected them. It was a massive, side-scrolling 2D was mostly complete. Tezuka and his team felt they had taken the concepts that made the series so special: freedom, athleticism, friendliness, and perfected them. It was a massive, side-scrolling 2D platformer. Nintendo packed everything into a 4 megabit cartridge, an impressive feat considering all the new graphics and sound. On the game's packaging, Nintendo added Super Mario Bros. 4 as a subtitle, reminding players that this was a continuation of the beloved series from the Famicom. Super Mario World was the quintessential launch title. It showcased the hardware's new technologies, while at the same time, providing fans of the series comfort and familiarity. In many ways, it embodied the Super Famicom. The primary colors of the console, red, green, blue, and yellow, were found throughout the game. In Koopa shells, Yoshis, and even on the game's box art. Shigefumi Hino, who had been nervous even to start development, felt that they had perfected the genre. I felt like, with Super Mario World, we had done everything we could with a side-scrolling jumping game, he said. With development finished, all that was left was for Nintendo to release the Super Famicom. Ever since Nintendo announced the delay of the system a year earlier, the company had been mostly silent. But on June 21st, 1990, they finally had an update. The Super Famicom was coming out on November 21st, 1990. On August 28th and 29th, Nintendo held a Shoshinkai trade show at the Harumi International Exhibition Center in Tokyo. There were now 33 developers making games for the Super Famicom. Many of the companies were at the show to demonstrate their upcoming games. But all eyes were on Nintendo. For the first time, they premiered the final version of the Super Famicom. The system would cost 25,000 yen, or around $170, and come with 2 controllers. To keep the price down, Nintendo didn't include any cables or power adapters. Nintendo also premiered their 2 launch titles. The first was F-Zero, an ultra-fast arcade racing game. It showcased one of the Super Famicom's new technologies, Mode 7, which gave a faux 3D effect. The second game was Super Mario World. Nintendo set up 10 Super Famicom stations at the trade show so attendees could try out the new games. 8 of them were dedicated to Super Mario World. People packed the booth for the entire show. The media was impressed by all the latest changes to the game. Electronic Gaming Monthly called it the premier piece of software shipping with the Super Famicom. The hype for Super Mario World and the Super Famicom was bigger than ever. Nintendo received 1.5 million pre-orders for their new console from wholesalers. With so many pre-orders, Nintendo worried that launch day might be a little chaotic. So they encouraged retailers to implement a reservation system when selling the Super Famicom. One store had so many reservation requests, they held a lottery and sent out postcards to the winners. 2 years after announcing the system, Nintendo was finally ready to enter the next generation, and for the first time, they were launching a new console with real competition in the market. In the early morning of November 20th, Nintendo loaded 100 trucks with boxes of Super Famicom consoles, along with F-Zero and Super Mario World cartridges. In an event dubbed Operation Midnight Shipping, Nintendo sent out their newest console and games in the dead of night, hoping to ward off thieves. And on the morning of November 21st, 1990, the Super Famicom and Super Mario World were officially on store shelves in Japan. Launch day was a mixed bag. The Haku Hinkan Toy Park store, which didn't take reservations, had a massive line outside the entrance. The store sold Super Famicoms on a first-come, first-served basis. As a result, many customers left without a console. But other stores, like the Odakyu department store, were relatively calm. The store issued reservation tickets 6 weeks ahead of time, anticipating that kids would play hooky to get the system. The store sold 1,500 Super Famicoms on launch day. But the biggest issue was the lack of stock. Although Nintendo had 1.5 million pre-orders, they could only ship 300,000 consoles. Many smaller stores, particularly mom-and-pop shops, didn't receive any consoles. Some stores took advantage of the shortage by offering the Super Famicom bundled with software at a marked-up price. Retailers accused Nintendo of stalling production to create a false shortage and drive up demand. Nintendo responded by promising to increase their manufacturing capacity in 1991. Despite the issues, the Super Famicom was a hit. According to a report from Nintendo, the initial stock of 300,000 consoles sold out in just 3 days, and Super Mario World was the crown jewel of the system.
To put it simply, it's everything a game should be. Challenging, frustrating, rewarding, and most important of all, unbelievably addictive. I'm still nursing an injured finger from a weekend solid, and I mean solid, play. If you've got a Super Famicom, this is as essential as the power supply. Julian Jazz Rignall, Mean Machines.
Super Mario World received rave reviews from the press. Famitsu magazine gave the game a score of 34 out of 40. They wrote, "The Mario series repeatedly powers up, and this may surprise some players, but I felt a lot of power in this entry. It feels like it has 3 times the ideas without impacting any of the fundamentals that make Mario games so much fun." But even with all the praise, some reviewers came away slightly disappointed. They expected more from Nintendo's new 16-bit console. One reviewer considered the game a bit stale compared to Super Mario Bros. 3. Others found the extra controls challenging to learn. None of that stopped customers from scooping up Super Mario World. Many people bought the game even without owning a Super Famicom. By February of 1991, Nintendo had sold 750,000 copies of Super Mario World, despite only selling 600,000 Super Famicom consoles. Super Mario Mania, once again, swept over Japan. A new wave of Super Mario merchandise, including plushies and toys, hit store shelves. Bandai released Super Mario World, Mario and Yoshi's Adventure Land, an interactive anime compatible with Bandai's Terabiko toy phone. There were cross-promotions with food and beverage companies, including McDonald's. There were mangas based on the game, such as the Super Mario Kun series. Nintendo and Warner Pioneer released the game's soundtrack on CD, featuring new jazz arrangements of Koji Kondo's music. Konami even released a gambling machine, Mario Roulette, based on the minigame in Super Mario World. The Super Famicom and Super Mario World were a success. Nintendo hit its goal of selling 3 million consoles within a year by August of 1991, 3 months ahead of time. And in total, Nintendo would sell 3.5 million copies of Super Mario World in Japan, making it the second best-selling game on the Super Famicom. By 1992, the Super Famicom overtook NEC's PC Engine in sales, cementing Nintendo as the top dog in the Japanese video game market. But when it came time to bring the Super Famicom and Super Mario World over to North America, things wouldn't be so easy. When Nintendo first revealed the Super Famicom in November of 1988, sales of the 8-bit Famicom were declining. But its North American counterpart, the Nintendo Entertainment System, was setting sales records. In 1988, Nintendo of America sold 7 million NES consoles and more than 40 million games. For the second year in a row, the NES was the #1 toy in the United States. The country had Nintendo fever.
If you haven't heard about the Nintendo Entertainment System, odds are you've either just awakened from a 2-year sleep or you don't have a child under the age of 14. Nintendo is simply the toy of the late 80s, a marketing phenomenon every bit as remarkable as the Cabbage Patch Kids craze a few years back. Dennis Lynch, Chicago Tribune.
1989 looked to be another banner year for Nintendo of America. But just like in Japan, there would be new contenders in the market. At the 1989 Summer Consumer Electronics Show in Chicago, Sega introduced the Genesis, the North American version of the Mega Drive. NEC brought the PC Engine over as the TurboGrafx 16. And the hot buzzword of the show was bits. To the general public, more bits meant better video games. The TurboGrafx 16 was technically an 8-bit console, but sported dual 16-bit graphics chips, and NEC marketed the console as a 16-bit system. Sega boasted that the Genesis was the only true 16-bit system, and promised arcade-quality graphics, stereo sound, and unsurpassed gameplay. With NEC and Sega bringing in more powerful consoles, it begged the question: where was Nintendo's 16-bit system? Officially, Nintendo said it had no plans to launch a 16-bit console in North America. During their presentation at the Summer CES show, Nintendo played a video hosted by a costumed Mario that showcased the NES and Game Boy. Mario tried to convince the audience that 16-bit consoles were not the future of video games, and that the NES was plenty powerful. The press called it propaganda. But while Nintendo of America feigned disinterest in 16 bits, video game magazines were picking up news on the Super Famicom from Japan. Video game magazines had seen a resurgence in the past year thanks to a booming video game industry. Nintendo even had a magazine, Nintendo Power, with an estimated 1.2 million subscribers. Nintendo carefully chose what to cover and what to keep up its sleeve. And it wanted to keep the Super Famicom up its sleeve. But other magazines didn't have those restrictions, and regularly looked to Japan for the latest video game news and rumors. There was GamePro, Video Games and Computer Entertainment, and Game Players. But by far, the magazine with the most coverage of Japan was Electronic Gaming Monthly, or EGM. In their very first issue from May of 1989, the magazine revealed the Super Famicom, calling it the most incredible game system ever seen. In their second issue, EGM had full-color photos of the Super Famicom prototype, along with the first mention of a new Super Mario game, Super Mario Bros. 4. It couldn't have made Nintendo happy. Super Mario Bros. 2 hadn't even been out for a year in North America, and Nintendo was spending 1989 hyping up Super Mario Bros. 3, due to come out in early 1990. By the fall of 1989, Nintendo of America could no longer deny that a 16-bit machine was in the works. Vice President of Marketing Peter Main confirmed the Super Famicom was real and coming to Japan, but he stopped short of announcing a North American release. Instead, Main affirmed that the company wanted to wring every last megabyte of power from the Nintendo Entertainment System before jumping into the 16-bit generation. In other words, any announcement of a new 16-bit system would cut into Nintendo of America's sales. But that didn't stop the press from talking about the Super Famicom and Super Mario Bros. 4. Electronic Gaming Monthly repeatedly brought over the latest news from Japan. In issue 4, they confirmed Super Mario Bros. 4 was now called Super Mario World, and showed the game's first screenshots. Despite the whisperings of a 16-bit console, Nintendo of America had another record year in 1989. They sold an astonishing 9 million NES consoles. For the third year in a row, the NES was the #1 selling toy. In addition, Nintendo's new Game Boy handheld, introduced in August of 1989, sold around 1 million units in less than 6 months. And despite the new competition, Nintendo still controlled about 80% of the $4 billion video game market. And 1990 looked like another big year. Nintendo of America was preparing to launch their highly anticipated new game, Super Mario Bros. 3. The company spent the past year hyping up the game with teasers and early releases on the PlayChoice 10 arcade cabinet. The game was even in a Hollywood film, The Wizard. In January of 1990, Nintendo Power had an article about the making of Super Mario Bros. 3, featuring a write-up on Mario creator Shigeru Miyamoto. The article briefly mentioned that Miyamoto was working on games for the Super Famicom, including Super Mario Bros. 4. But that wasn't all. In the mailbag section, a reader noted he read about the Super Famicom in other magazines, and wondered why Nintendo Power had not talked about it more. The magazine replied that the Super Famicom wasn't even out in Japan. They only wanted to provide information that was, quote, timely and accurate. Nintendo Power now had a subscriber base of almost 2 million. This was their first acknowledgement of the Super Famicom and Super Mario World. With the hype of Super Mario Bros. 3 dying down, a new hype emerged for Nintendo's next console and Super Mario game. And those other magazines kept the hype train moving. Rumors swirled about what the Super Famicom would look like in North America, and when exactly it was coming. One rumor suggested that the Super Famicom was actually a more powerful 32-bit system. Another report claimed that Nintendo planned to call the new system SFX in North America. There was even gossip that the Super Famicom would come to North America as an attachment to the NES. By the fall of 1990, it seemed like Nintendo was tired of the rumors and speculation. In September, Nintendo Power published a blurb on the unveiling of the Super Famicom in Japan, along with screenshots of Super Mario World. They also took a jab at other publications, asking readers to stick with Nintendo Power for, quote, hard facts and not wimpy rumors. But Electronic Gaming Monthly also covered the unveiling of the Super Famicom in Japan, and much more extensively. Their November issue had a multi-page preview of the console, Super Mario World, and other upcoming games. Still, with all the previews, rumors, and speculation, no one outside of Nintendo knew when the Super Famicom and Super Mario World were coming stateside.